And now we're live. And hopefully you can see us there. We are on YouTube working fine today. Our Facebook link crashed, but that's okay. It has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about today, which is troubleshooting and really getting your whole connection set up, getting everything working properly. One of the problems I had, and as I welcome in the panel, hi everybody. We're
Hi,
joined
Robert.
here with Corel, Colin, and Andrew. So, gentlemen, last night I tried to put everything back together because I broke it last time. Last time, I think we were without audio for 10 minutes. Our first 10 minutes had no audio. Is that right, Corel?
I don't remember that.
And
Yep.
now Corel has no audio. Yeah,
I had to mute myself so that I didn't pull the bad thing I did last week, which was let the audio blare out while I'm pulling up the YouTube feed. Don't mind me.
And that's because I realized 10 minutes in that we didn't have audio. So vMix has this wonderful new feature they added where you have an option to now get this big low volume sign that blurts out, and it'll let you know if you're not getting any audio. But it doesn't work quite right just yet. So someone actually did a test and figured out that if you set it that if your audio isn't at whatever decibel level you choose, let's say 40 decibels, if your audio doesn't reach 40 decibels for 10 seconds, it'll say low volume. However, it seems to have a countdown. So if you get over the 40 decibels within the 10 seconds, it pauses. And if it goes under for another 5 seconds, or however long it paused, then the low volume sign will come up. So I turned it off because it was just more annoying. And we had no volume, so I didn't get the low volume message. So let's talk about troubleshooting problems like that. I want to hear some of your greatest horror stories on troubleshooting. I don't care who starts first. I want to hear some of your greatest horror stories.
I think I'll do the Colin reminder today.
That's right. Prayer. Well, since you reminded, you get to pray.
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for the opportunity to do this broadcast. We pray, Lord, that it'll be a blessing to those who hear it and help us to say the things that are right and pleasing in your sight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So who's going to start first? Now we have no audio from Colin.
Multiple independent mutes. So I'll take a crack at it. I'm going to assume you're talking about troubleshooting something that's live or about to happen.
Yes.
Okay. My first step is keep calm, right? And be methodical about what you're going to do about the problem you have, right? I think the number one issue I see with troubleshooting is freaking out and just trying a whole bunch of random things that aren't going to help anything. You have to be very methodical about it. I really should have noted the last trouble. I guess, doing the graduation this past weekend was the last time I kind of had to step through troubleshooting it. And you always get these looks about how did you know to do that? I didn't. I know there's a sequence of things that you do. And if you're in a VIX or Infocom member, there is actually, like, I don't know if it's ANSI certified or a VIX or the old Infocom standard, what have you, but they're kind of a series of steps that you do for troubleshooting just about anything that's technology based. And I'm not going to say turn it off and turn it back on again, but really, I mean, seriously, that's where you start though. Do you have power? And we were doing an outdoor graduation in a field, and what was the first thing to go down? Power, right? So, do you have power, whether the switch is on or off or not? Is the switch on, right? When you're looking at a signal path, you don't just randomly start, saying, oh, it could be this or simple. You start at the beginning of the chain, go to the end of the chain, check everything in the chain, make sure it's working. I mean, as you step through it, methodologically, whatever the word is, as you step through it,
Methodically.
methodically, that's the word.
I had to think about it.
It's like, what is that? As you step through it methodically, at some point you'll get to the right answer. And if you do the same thing every time, instead of freaking out about it, you have a checklist. Those of you who are former military folks know all about this, right? Right? You drill it instead of, you don't know what kind of opposite of heaven you're going to find yourself in, right? So, if you step through that list each and every time, you're going to get to the answer, you're going to get to the solution. And it'll be a lot less stressful. And hopefully you fix your problem and you carry on.
I think your first suggestion is really key, to just stay calm. I also think there's quite a bit of wisdom in knowing things. I always say, if you know your path, if you know how things get from point A to point B, you're at so much a better advantage than someone who just knows how to fix a problem. If you know your signal path is everything.
Well, I'm a little disturbed that you'd say that. I mean, you shouldn't really be there unless you knew it.
Oh, no. Wait. Okay. You're talking to the church AV forum.
Oh, is it Tuesday?
Yes. We're not talking to just throw out the fact that you've been a seasoned 20-year professional. Imagine that you're someone who the church board got together and says, he knows technology, he is now hired.
Checklist.
Why do I feel like you're pointing at me?
Wow. Seriously, Robert, checklist, especially for volunteers.
Yep.
Yeah, checklist. There just has to be a checklist. Step through, because they'll start, especially if you don't know what to check, you're in a world of hurt. You're just going to be worried and doing stuff, and it's not going to be helpful, and people will be stressed out at each other. You don't need to check through the step list or the checklist. Step through the checklist, and if it's not in your head, it really should be written down, laminated there, available for any volunteer to say, okay, we're not getting a signal to YouTube. Have you checked the publishing point, right? Have you checked that you're getting an internet signal? Have you checked that the encoder is on? Have you checked that the credentials somehow didn't change, or that, the method on Facebook changed, right? What have you? Are you getting a signal in to stream at all? Did you try the backup? There has to be a checklist.
See? So one of the things I noticed that Colin just did was he went downstream and came back upstream. Right? Anybody catch that? Anybody? Right. See, because look, the thing is, usually when we're building on a system, we go the opposite way. You're starting from where your, source is, going to your end goal. Right. And so the key thing is, when you're troubleshooting, breathe, calm down, start downstream, do all these checks until you get to a point where you say, okay, this looks like this is the source of the issue. Key thing.
The other thing I would say is, when you're troubleshooting an issue, too many cooks spoil the broth. There are a lot of people that will want to help, and the amount of time it takes to resolve a problem increases by an order of magnitude for each person added to the solution. Right? There have been plenty of times where at church they'll have a technology problem, and people all, someone else is managing it, but people all gravitate, look at me. I'm like, I'm not going up there unless somebody calls me up there. That person is going to deal with it until they say, can you help? Because when I get up there, I'm going to stop a bunch of other people from doing things, so that, there's no point in you checking object A and someone's doing something to object B. You're going to be fixing and unfixing the same problem.
Where I see that the most is actually in Zoom meetings. Everybody's a Zoom professional. If someone comes on and says, You get 50 million people now. No, do this. Oh, click this button. If you find the thing, click the microphone. No, go out and come back in. No, click on the original sound. You don't know what original sound is? Okay, go here. Why don't you log off, come back in on another computer, bring up your phone. And so all you get is a cacophony of instructions, and the person is just gone crazy.
Not calm.
No, calmness goes out the window. I don't know what it is about Zoom, but everybody wants to show off how much they know. I'm going to force you to do it my way. And so half the time, like you said, I don't say anything. I let them go through a bunch of things, and then you're like, oh, the host has you muted. Nothing you can do about it. So, I want to take a few minutes to talk about what Colin said about checklists. I think those of us who are old heads, who've been doing this for a while, we do our other AV members a disservice sometimes because we keep it all up in here and we never write things down. Who here is guilty of that? Policies and procedures. I mean, really, it was pulling teeth for me to write it. And so, yeah, sometimes they ignore it. But how long would it take you, Karel, to write down a procedure so that anybody can go and turn on the system where you work and get it to not optimal level, not even troubleshooting level, but just operational level? How long do you think it would take to do that?
Well, first you got to sit down and actually think through what you're working on, right? And then you know all the right terminology to use with the different apparatuses that you're dealing with. But it may boil down to look at big black box at the bottom, hit massive orange switch. And we know what that's for, the power, right? Then after that, wait 15 seconds or 20 seconds. Why? Because everything's on a relay. We know this, but they may not. And then you hear click and click and click, and then the amps come on, right? If we're dealing with the audio system. And then, you're going to tell them, okay, how do I get audio going in the room? Well, some folks might know you have a master fader. If it's down, it has to be up, right? So you have to identify, oh yes, on the console, it is in this specific location over here. So in other words, what am I saying? There's so much stuff that we just boom, 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 boom. But you got to think through that whole entire process and then break it down to what are the essentials, and then simplify that down to what they really need to know and where they can find it and how they can do it. And why is that important? Well, hey, sometimes we have our church secretary turning on the audio console and putting up one microphone for a funeral that's happening that we couldn't get a technician to in the week. And it's happened. Now, I didn't write the manual. Thanks goodness to our former front of house team lead that did write that manual and did laminate it and did leave it under the console. But yeah, it's a serious thought process to really go through it and then break it down and then really simplify it down into something that somebody can ingest and really work through and make sense of, because some things are not even that obvious, right? Like where something might be located. Like our power switch is like underneath the rack, and you can't really see that switch because you have to like look under the table to find it. Right.
Ours is labeled, but unless you're 3 feet high, you're not going to see it.
There you go.
Most of us just do it by feel.
So if I were to put a quantity to it, I mean, it depends on how complicated the system is, but I'm going to say probably for like every minute that I have to sit down and do something in that thing, you're probably going to spend at least a good, 10 minutes, probably thinking through the process and then trying to write it down. I mean, I'm just trying to, put some kind of quantity on it.
When I finally wrote our manual, I gave it to someone who wasn't technically sound at all. And I said, while I'm standing here, see if this makes sense. And that's how we were able to find glitches, because They went through the process and they said, where's the switch? You said here, turn on the switch for the monitor. Where is it? So then you say, okay, I have to say, lift up the curtain on the right-hand side on the front stage, stage right. What stage right? Is it this? Wait, which is? So then you realize, okay, right. The side with the piano. Which is the piano? And of course, they move the piano, so that becomes a moot point. So it's that checklist is so important. Why don't we do it?
I mean, I'll take that one straight away. I will tell you why. There has not been a document written. A lot of the time, you're scrambling to get things in place, and then the Band-Aid, and then the other Band-Aid, and then the other Band-Aid, and then the other Band-Aid. And I could keep going, but then things don't get written down because processes, I know for us, have changed quite a bit. And then, once we kind of gotten into a groove, everybody that was like volunteering on our teams has just gotten used to it. And then we haven't gone, and then they're teaching other people how to come in and do it, thankfully, with a lot of our crews. But the key thing we do have is like documentation for us of signal flow, right?
Ooh.
I mean, that's something that people can follow if we teach them how to work with it. Now, is that a little bit more of an advanced kind of concept? Yes, but once we break down what the symbols mean and this, most everybody's usually fairly comfortable to understand certain aspects of it, or maybe that they understand, okay, I don't understand enough of this to get this, but associate it in their own way. And that's one of the key things, because, we have different learning types. So some people want to be shown, this is how you go through this process. Now, if that changes next week, that's no good to them. But usually by the time we've tried to go through and did enough, we've already ironed out a lot of the kinks to just try to get it this, and this, right? Some people might read a list, and that's easy enough for them to follow. We may still show them, but they can walk through the list. Okay, I remember they turned this and did this and did this. And then other folks, they'll just stumble and bump their heads against stuff, but I really vote against that one, because if they break something, I'm definitely going to be charging them or taking a zero out of their paycheck. And for our volunteers, it's a zero. So,
Right. It all comes back to home.
Yeah.
So, Colin, why don't you create a checklist?
Well, I do. The thing is, unlike yourself, you're a director of a ministry. I'm not. I'm but a mere volunteer. That doesn't mean I couldn't do a checklist and say, hey, here's a checklist. But no one reads them. I'm just quite honest. I mean, at one church I volunteer at, I was hired to do an earlier system of theirs. I did a whole binder of stuff, and no one, churches change pastors, they change staff, volunteers change, and I was like, we should figure out, kind of like documentation of all this stuff. I was like, oh, it's in that binder right there in the shelf. Take it off the shelf, start flipping through it. Oh. And I
Yes.
think there's a
Always
cause
the
of some
dust.
frustration, because I noticed that the senior pastor did a checklist and laminated it, and I saw there, I was like, oh, look, someone did a checklist. I think that was born out of frustration, but everyone needs a checklist, and someone with authority to mandate that they use it.
Well, as you pointed out, I am the leader of the ministry. There's one room that we have, what you would consider the youth chapel. That room I wrote instructions for, and it saved me a lot of trouble. Because when people say, oh, I need to have this service at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I'm like, I'm not going out there 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. So I have the instructions there. What I do is, if they schedule it in time, I'll go sit with them and go through the instructions. The instructions are taped to the desk. Now, sometimes a hymnal or two will be strategically placed on top of it, but the instructions are taped to the desk. So anytime someone says, I need to use the room, the instructions are taped to the desk. And they've been vetted by a multitude of non-technical people. So in that room, it makes sense. And that's why I encourage people to use that room. But you're right, in some cases, Carell, when, if you're going through the checklist and there's a problem, let's say the amps don't kick in because someone switched off a circuit breaker. That's beyond the level of someone trying to go against that checklist, right?
Yep. And I'll say this too. Some things are not obvious, right? I'll give you an example. So we had sound check Friday night. Everything was cool. Praise team did their thing. We got in and out and we're good. The front of house team then goes back into church the next day and we get an emergency phone call. And we left the console on and everything overnight, right? Well, they have power modules and there's a battery and there's a backup to them, right? The console we have. So we have a main power and a secondary. Well, the thing was we only had one of those power things set up instead of it being in series. So what happened was that the power unit, and if you look at the desk, you know, there's light indicators there and one of them was out. We just didn't realize it at the time when it was happening in the morning that it failed. Now, the only person who figured it out was our senior front of house staffer at the time, because he was like, all right, he's working through everything. He's like, okay, you've done this. And he's going through this mental checklist. And that was something you're not going to catch unless you just really, really seriously knew, oh, okay, wait a minute. You know, this is like a power issue. It's not passing anything. It's firing up, but it's not passing a thing. So thankfully we had the secondary. He said, okay, guys, go to the closet, go grab the other one, plug it in. We didn't have them plugged in series. We do now. And that saved our bacon, or veggie bacon. But, you know, the key thing is like, you know, there's going to be things that you may not even think of, you know, that'll pop in. And that's like, that was a rarity. We know to check that now. Right.
See, you said something important that I'm going to toss to Andrew. You said you noticed, well, something had happened, but you didn't notice. It didn't really click for you that a light wasn't coming on. Was that what you said?
Yeah, it was one of the indicator lights. There's 3 of them.
So, Andrew, go ahead. Just take it where it's going to go.
You and I talk about this often. And there's this tendency that we have, and I mean we technical people, we're very focused about stuff that we're doing, right? And sometimes we'll notice that something is awry, something is off, but you're like, you know what, I'll come back to that. I'll circle back to that. I don't have time for that now. Sometimes we do that consciously, and sometimes it's just subconscious because we're in the habit of, I'm focused on this, I need to get it, I've got my timeline. And 9 times out of 10, when you don't touch something that you should have at least looked at, it comes back to bite you at a very inconvenient time, very inconvenient time. And you know, we're afraid of the rabbit hole because that's happened. Robert and I have gone through that. He'll call me up or I'll call him up where we're working on something together and we go to do it and we're like, oh, what's this? And all of a sudden, this 15-minute thing that you were going to do is 45 minutes because you got sidetracked by this thing, which shows you this other thing. And we're annoyed during the process, but we know that if we didn't do it when we're both on the call and can move through it faster than any other time, it would come up at a ridiculously inconvenient moment.
Case in point. So we're dealing with a project. Oh, just send me an email with the information. 10 minutes later. Have you gotten that email? No, I haven't gotten the email yet. Did you send it? Yeah, I sent it. Check your email server. Yeah, it went out. You know what? 2 days ago, I noticed I didn't get an email from somebody. Let me go check the server. Server's been down for 4 days. Then you realize there's a ton of email that you haven't responded to, and Colin is calling you. Did you get the email? Did you put in that order I asked you to put in? You're like, what order? Because I sent you an email 3 days ago, but I didn't check on the email server as soon as I saw there was a problem. And now I'm 4 days late and I have deadlines that I didn't even know I had. How does that affect you in the AV world?
Well, listen, everything is very time sensitive. And I laugh because I've been having that actually happen with my work phone most recently. So somebody sent me a text message, right? A text message. And I didn't get it until an hour later. and I missed the recording that they had to handle, which was fine, right? But I was supposed to be the technical support to that. So they soldiered through it. But I literally, my coworker was sitting right next to me. I got the text message, and it was like, this thing is timestamped like 1:45, and I just got it at 2:45, an hour late. And I called the person. I said, hey, I'm sorry, I missed it. But then that raised another point. I had the appointment on my email, which is on my phone, which should have dinged. It didn't notify me. What happened? And there's no explanation for this. I'm probably going to have to factory reset my phone or something, because it's doing
Yes, you
some
will.
crazy stuff. But the point is like, when you start noticing these things, like, no, it's bad. It's very bad. Because, I just had, like, a couple of weeks ago, situation where I was doing a meeting at 3 a.m. in the morning for us, here in the office, because we were doing something for Asia.
Right.
And that meeting, had its issues, did not go well in certain regards. But, we were able to troubleshoot some things in real time, because I was able to answer calls and emails and text messages or whatever on time. I mean, it's hypercritical. It's the difference between somebody looking good on camera for the whole world to see and something happening and then they look really dumb.
Yep. So a lot of times with churches, how often do you get a chance to go in there during a calm time and look things over? I mean, I can talk about networking. Networking really it gets the most looked at when it's installed or when it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
You're really only expecting those things to work. We have the tendency to expect as soon as you turn something on, they'll work. So if we wait until the day of operation to do that, it's usually very bad.
Yep.
So how often do you get a chance to go in there on a downtime and really take a look at things? Maybe just go through your checklist that you have and make sure it's still applicable.
That's
Well,
always been a thing for me. The folks that show up,
10 minutes early or 10 minutes
yeah,
late.
10 minutes before divine hour, and they start freaking out because notice another part of the checklist and about staying calm is preparation for it. You're not going to be calm if you're, facing embarrassment because you have 10 minutes to do 20 minutes of work in order to get through your list. That there's no calmness to that, right? So, part of it is one, being prepared for the eventuality that something's going to go wrong, and it will. And part of the preparation is giving yourself enough time to step through your list when that time comes. So, one church I volunteer at, what they've started doing is checking everything out, including all the encoding settings, all the webcasting stuff, the day before, as opposed to the morning of. I know some churches that have staff, like paid staff, they do it, they do like a Wednesday,
Right.
a Wednesday or midweek check of all systems. And then they have like consistent meetings and stuff throughout the week. And then, everything's in preparation for showtime, which is, divine hour. And of course, the main event is the sermon. So, depending on the composition of the volunteer or professional staff base and kind of like the culture and the makeup and the type of church that you're going to, it varies. But in any way you look at it, there has to be some preparation that is more than, oh, I got here 5-10 minutes early and I've now discovered things aren't working right.
Yep. I mean, I know for us, our preparations happened on Friday, right? Everybody came in after work. Sound check was scheduled for like 8:00. So the front of house team was there at like 7. The video folks would come in, check their cameras, place the tripods, get things ready to run. And then things would end up going back, at least the cameras wouldn't, we'd lock them up. But We make sure everything was going. That's how we knew that there was a problem with the audio console the next day when we went through all our pre-flight checks and everything was working. All of a sudden, it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's highly paramount to make sure that you're doing that constantly. And one of the things that's important for that is to set the culture, and the culture is usually set by the team leader. Okay.
Why do y'all keep coming back to that?
No. Because listen. I'm a director just like you.
Mm-hmm.
But notice, I didn't say me. Now, ultimately, the buck stops with me.
Right.
But the team leader for that team sets the tone. Right. And that's a key thing here, because yes, I'm going to set the overall culture for how we're going to operate. But we have within some of our dynamics, some folks that are more gung-ho about some of the technical things and trying to make sure that that stuff is buttoned up as well as operationally. And then we have some folks that are more so focused on operations. The engineering stuff, not so much of a critical thing. Right. But, you kind of have to have people that are in both camps. Right. And so if you don't, you're going to suffer. So, in certain situations, in places that I'm near and dear to, they have audio drawings and all the engineering schematics for the audio systems. And then there are other systems that we don't have drawings for. Right. So, I mean, it's just a matter of understanding that and trying to develop the culture to get there. See, because the thing is, and I want to say it, like with us at Metro, right? We've developed a culture of very good audio engineers, mm-hmm. right? Like that's just been the trend that's come out of the church because of the intentionality of how they built that crew and recruited and brought people in and have continued that culture, right? And the thing is that we have several tiers. So you have like your maybe trainee level, and then you have like your operator level. And then you might have your A1, who's like your seasoned, like top level engineer. And then you have the engineer. Mm-hmm. Right. And usually the engineers are the ones that have been there for like forever. But the thing is like any problem you have, you can work through it because we're systematically thinking through every single thing. Whereas the operators may have an inkling of what's going on, but may not necessarily know the specific thing. But we're working them up to get to that point. But on the video side, it's a different process, different look, and all that kind of stuff. So you want to have somebody that's over there that's thinking through those things, because things might not necessarily be completely analogous. Yes, wire is wire, but how those things are developed and how they cascade into one device or another, it's always good to have that complement on the other side. If you are the one that's doing it all, right, you want to try to disseminate that knowledge out to some other folks that can help out with that, because if you're not available, I hate to see what happens to a church service when things crash and burn.
Yeah. So on that note, it took me a long time to recognize as a leader I was doing things wrong, because I always made sure I got there really early. We had the early morning service. I didn't run that, thank God. Then we had Sabbath school, which I made sure I was trying to be there as often as possible. I told them from the beginning, I can't be there all the time. We had a couple of people who volunteered to switch off for that, but then they fell off. And it's very hard to get someone to volunteer to do that early service. So I was trying to be there as early as possible. But during the lull, I would go and turn everything else on, video systems, all the audio systems, get everything up and running, and made sure it was ready because people would just show up late. And it took me a long time to realize I was the problem. Because I made things easy for them, there was no incentive to get there early. So I stopped, because like you said, the buck stopped with me, and I felt really bad if things had a problem. But then, I realized I'm not going to set things up for you anymore. If you're late, service will be a failure, and it'll be on you, and they'll come scream at me, and that'll let me have a good discussion with you about your timeliness. But when I stopped doing that, and people would come with 5 minutes to spare and realize it takes 10 minutes to get everything up and running, they became cognizant of how much work it took. And they actually started to come on time because they realized they don't want to look bad either.
Right.
The volunteers we had were not terrible people. It's not like They didn't want to do the work, but I was doing it all for them. There was no reason for them to show up.
Right.
So
And-
I had to learn I was being a bad leader in trying to do everything.
And I will say this, right? I'm gonna have to probably hide after this is over, but but the
Sure.
thing about it is, right? So I wasn't the senior team leader on our front of house team when I first was on that team. I was one of the A1s basically, and we had the actual team leader who was in control of everything, and he was the teacher. So he was always working with everybody, trying to make sure they were acclimatized and all this other kind of stuff, right? Then we had some of the other seasoned operators. They kind of want to have more hands-on, work. They would let the other folks, kind of work with the console and all that, and try to get things, down pat in certain areas of the service. But the more critical ones, they would take over. Me, I was that jerk that would say, "All right, we had sound check yesterday. Were you paying attention? All right, I'm gonna walk away now. You guys have fun." And the thing about it is, though, when they crashed and burned in a controlled way. Now I was around the corner in our record room or whatever, helping out, or just right outside the door, but I was observing them and their activity. So that way, you could take everything that they learned from the teacher, everything that they watched from the person that was operating, and then try to apply it. And so I was like, I'm not going to baby this. And so the different approaches, I think, helped them out in different ways. So the ones that could sink and swim, they started to swim, right? And the ones that were sinking, we tried to help them out, give them a life raft and get them bolstered up. So where the confidence level got to where some people that they saw those knobs and everything and got freaked out by all that stuff, they're like, oh, I actually know what these do now. But it took them being on an island in certain cases in a controlled way. So I didn't admit that, but the truth of the matter is that's how they got good at trying to figure out certain problems. And then what you notice is that the quality of the questions that they started to ask started to improve, because they were asking specific questions about specific pieces of gear or specific knobs or, pieces on those pieces of gear. And it's like, night and day difference. You could see that the wheels were turning.
A lot of people are not just inconsiderate for inconsiderate's sake. They don't recognize how difficult things are. And unless people are needed and realize that they're needed, they're going to behave like, spectators and a drag on society. If they realize that they are needed, most people will step up to that challenge. Right? Not everybody will, but many people will. And if we deprive them of that opportunity, we hurt them too.
Yeah, there has to be room for growth, especially sometimes I guess there's the assumption if you're not really, really, really into this, you're never going to be interested in checklists and troubleshooting. You just want to show up and do your job and leave. And that's really not true, because a lot of the people are interested in learning more. We just have to give them the opportunity. And I admit, I wasn't really giving them that opportunity. I would talk about it, and I would hold trainings, I would do other things. But as Carell said, not everybody learns that way. You can't just hand someone a manual and say, okay, figure it out. And we definitely can't write down every single troubleshooting option there is out there. Years ago, we had a situation where in the middle of a sermon, the board went out. Now, it didn't seem like the board went out. What happened was the pastor's mic went out. And so obviously you're trying to smoothly go through the regular steps. If your mic goes out, you check the battery. Okay, the battery's fine. You look at the wireless signal, make sure that's fine. Well, everything seems to be fine. What do you check next? You could just shout out answers. It's fine.
I mean, you might look at the wiring. Hey, did the wire get run over? We had that happen during the middle of a service. Mm-hmm. Somebody ran over it with a wheelchair and cut it right in half.
Wow.
So you go batteries.
Too.
You start to go down your checklist, but there's something you need to remember. You're in the middle of a sermon. You don't really have time to methodically go through everything. So, of course, your idea is let me just take the plug out and go into a different channel. Now, it was an analog board, so now you're trying to match up frequencies and things because it's a lavalier, so you want to avoid feedback. But the sermon is still trying to go on. And what happens, Andrew, you mentioned this before? Everybody wants to help.
Oh, of course.
They start turning around looking at you.
Oh, wait.
And then they look to someone, can you help? But it
Yeah.
just turned out the board went bad in the middle of a program. That's it. That's all
Yeah.
it turned out to be. So you have to replace the board, but you can't do that in the middle of the program.
I beg to differ. We did it.
That's actually happened to me on
That
something
happened to
pretty high
us.
profile.
Yeah, that happened to us. Now the kicker is our broadcast audio board, which functions on a split. That really on the broadcast we didn't notice anything, right? But the front of house lost because it impacted the speakers inside of the house because of the board going out. So really, we just encourage the pastors like, look, you're fine on the stream. You keep going. Just speak loud enough for these folks. We're gonna go get a mixer, come back and plug that bad boy in. And
You
we
had enough
did it.
time to do that.
We did it and got it back up and running. And at least, we hobbled through the rest of the service. But that was a less than ideal situation. And not everybody has a console sitting around, that was down in an extra area somewhere.
Why not?
Did. I mean, not everybody.
I challenge that with not everyone has a console lying around. Why not?
I mean, I'm just saying, some folks just buy what they need and think that's all they need.
But
Nah.
yeah, but
No, you need, you know what? I'll say this for whether you're working for Mammon or the Lord. What's the worst number in business, worship, anything that you're doing that's critical? What's the worst number?
I know one is the loneliest number. I don't.
One, right? You have no redundancy. You don't have anything to fall back on. Even if you went out and got a $10 2-channel Behringer on eBay, that's a backup.
Hey.
Right? Your budget can scale up from $10. I even saw one, I think I saw it for $4.75. It was a used Behringer analog, like 2-channel board. Your entire board goes down. One, that's kind of rare. Usually, well, it depends on who made it, but usually your channel strip goes down. So,
Yep.
channel 1 goes down, which is happened to me. You go to channel 3,
Yep.
whatever's empty, you go to it. But if your board really does blow up, go down, a lot of them are computer based. If the ASIC, decides to give up the ghost or whatever, cheap old analog board, just so you can keep going until, if your ministry is resourced and blessed enough to have, a really nice backup board, gives you time to replace it, or you just keep going on so that there's no disruption in service by the inexpensive thing that you have. And I mean, it's probably something we should do, and probably just step through. I think people would appreciate it, like a list of, here are inexpensive ways to keep your service going, either online in a hybrid environment or in person. Here's an inexpensive but good board. Here's an inexpensive but good encoder. Here's an inexpensive but good, I don't know, laptop to run ProPresenter, what have you. Just a list of things that, okay, stuff went wrong with, your regular equipment list. Here is your kind of bug out bag for technology, right?
Now,
I think it's something we should do.
I say this too, right? When folks outgrow their current ecosystem, one of the things they tend to do is throw out what they don't need. Don't do it. Because the old console that we could have just thrown out or given away, donated, whatever, that's what saved us. Right? It was just down in our gym. So we went, got it, brought it up, hooked it up, just did the bare essentials to get it functional, and we did our thing. But the thing about it is just because you outgrow a certain ecosystem doesn't mean that you should get rid of it. Why was it advantageous to us? Well, there was a couple of reasons. One, it was available. Two, we knew it. Okay. 3, it was integrated before, so we knew where we needed to plug it in. Are we seeing a theme here? And that's the thing. So a lot of times we think, oh, well, we don't need this anymore. We're not going to ever use this. No. There's certain things where, yes, you should go get rid of that stuff. But you need to have some duplicates or extra stuff or something for, hey, if this goes south, at least we know we have this. Peace of mind is what we're talking about, basically.
Well, a lot of times when it comes to disaster recovery, people assume, like, if they say, how often does this happen? You say, oh, it's not that frequent. This is the number of times it's happened to me in my career. And they'll be like, well, then I don't want to have it around. I don't want to deal with it. And what I've learned over the years is to ask the question differently. So years ago, when we would do disaster recovery for organizations, they would always have this line of business application or whatever, that was their key thing. That was the thing that was most important when there was an outage to bring up first. But you know what they complain about in real life when there's a downtime? I can't send any email, right? I can't send any email. So what we started to do is ask them and basically do tabletop exercises with them. Hey, we're going through this disaster recovery thing. If everything were to go down right now and you couldn't do the following things, which of those things would we have to fix first? And all of a sudden you get totally different answers than if you open-ended and say, what's the most important or what's the most critical app or whatever. No, just if you can't do your basics, how will you behave? And that's basically what you're discussing there, is making sure that even in a freak accident, you're able to do the basics. Because we're in a tiny church and we have a little board, a little mixer.
Not that
But
little.
one morning I came in and the television went down. I went to check everything and the television went down. Right. And I had a monitor laying around so I could make a substitute there. But then it's like, we're going to have to consider having an El Cheapo, one of these around just in case.
Mm-hmm.
As we're thinking about doing some major upgrades, and because this is a technical show, I can say it. We're thinking about going 100% Dante, which means you're going to have network runs everywhere, and wherever you need an XLR, you'll just plug in a Dante XLR connector and connect your XLR, and where you don't, it'll give us some flexibility with the different ends we can have. Now they even have Dante Bluetooth, they have Dante USB, and soon it's going to be Dante Video that they're going to incorporate. So we're just thinking about running Dante everywhere. And I'm trying to think about the redundancy there. The good thing is that's just a mapping. You just map from here to here to here, and you can change your whole configuration easily. But would we need redundancy? Because right now with our system, you have an IDR and you have the Surface. The Surface is really just a big control board.
Remote.
That's it. It's really just a remote control board because all the intelligence is in the IDR. But I'm trying to figure out, would we be able to switch back to analog quickly if we ended up going to Dante? You lose that ability a little bit, but the redundancy is within the system itself. Yes, this is a high level talk, but this is an AV form. This is what we can talk about.
So what do you mean by switch back to analog?
Yeah, good. I'm glad.
If the console went down, if I'm trying to look for points of failure in the troubleshooting, because it's all well and good. I want to buy all this new technology and install it. But that's with the assumption that everything is always going to work fine. What happens when something goes wrong?
I guess you really have to explore that with as you talk about points of failure, because your microphone is analog, right?
Yes.
So no matter what you do, your voice is analog. If you lose your voice, doesn't matter what your system does, right? You're not going to hear anything from that person, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
the backup hopefully is someone else will start speaking. right? Your mic fails, you get another
Grab
mic.
another mic.
The cable, right, is an analog cable, right?
Yeah.
An XLR
We
cable,
have redundant cables. Yeah.
right? If that
So
fails, you
far-
get another cable.
So
then
far,
you get
everything
to
you've
the. I'm gonna
yes,
keep
just
on
so far,
going,
everything you talked about is redundant. Go on, go on.
right? Right. You get to the conversion, whatever, if it's an AXI, if it's an ASIO, or what have you, that's going from that analog connection to that Dante. Now that could fail, right?
Mhm.
So what do you do if it fails? Right?
You're gonna have
Do
to
you
just
string that analog connection from that analog microphone? You have a reel standing by and you string it, you sling it back to the back of the room to the front of house console and plug it into, if it has one, an analog input, right? You could. Could you have a transmitter nearby, one of those little brick transmitters? You stick it into the microphone and you already have a receiver on the other end. All you have to do is switch to that channel. That's
Mhm.
probably more practical, especially in a worship scenario. Um, do you have a redundant piece of equipment, right? You, if you're able to, if it's an installed thing that you have, if you're actually going to put in floor plates, wall plates, what have you, probably not practical in the middle of the service to get a screwdriver, take that out, get to the Ethernet connection to swap out that component, right? That's not very practical,
Right.
right? Do you have in that floor box, wall plate, what have you, just an open female RJ45 or HC8P, whatever you want to call it, jack, or well, receptacle. Well, yeah, jack. So you can then plug in an ASIO, something that's portable, or some other receiver, assuming that it's powered by your switch, right? There's, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, Dante in and of itself is a redundant redundant technology. Do you have a parallel network? Should that be the problem, that it's an actual networking problem, that you're using both Dante A and Dante B in your setup should one fail? I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways to look at it.
Yep.
So I'm going to say this: location, 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 location. What am I talking about? Well, where do all your home run hits for your existing system go to? Do you
Mhm.
pull them out when you put in your new stuff? My short answer would be no. You leave it, right?
Oof.
Well labeled, but you leave it. Now, for me, it all depends on where you want your stage boxes to be, right? The stage boxes could be at the stage, or in the case of what we did at Metro, our stage boxes for our digital system, which we have not converted front of house to digital yet, or to Dante, but all of the home run hits for front of house and for record audio and the third spare that we have in there that's just not hooked up and going to anything all go into our broadcast audio room and then disseminate out to the location. So that's where the wiring for front of house goes to. But here's the key thing. We have a split there at our record audio room where that's all plugged into the Dante network, and that's what's feeding our digital network and what will feed our front of house board when we get it installed. The analog wires will still stay at front of house, available for them to plug in anything they need if they need it.
Wow. That's interesting. I didn't consider that. I was sort of looking forward to pulling all the old cable, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense. In the event that something
sense.
breaks down in the chain, you have a quick fix while you work on fixing the chain.
Right. And I'll tell you this, it's good to have flexibility both ways. Now, why is that a thing? Well, let me tell you what happened at work. So we had analog line going across the top of the ceiling, going over to our DSP processor that did our mono cluster, right? Well, there's nasty hum in that line, and we were not able to figure out why into the tarnations it was doing that and what was causing it or any of that. There could have been a cut in the cable. We don't know. So what did we do? We replaced the main processor because it failed, and we got something new and fancy, and it had Dante on it. So we have now cascaded the top box down to the bottom box of the same kind. And that now is the DSP that's driving that center cluster. And we have bypassed the audio from the analog feed that was coming across. Now, that leaves me in a very stuck position.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the box fails or that Dante connection were to conk out for whatever reason, I lose those speakers. I don't have an analog backup. So the thing is, in trying to plan out the system, I try to, have my cake and eat it too.
Well, let me ask you guys one thing. Are we talking about backing up Dante because we don't trust it?
No.
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm. I haven't had a Dante failure, and that's with an imperfectly installed system. That's with a system when it was installed, it was all new and people didn't really know what they're doing. So we're running off an unallocated IP address. Nothing's really connected to anything else. And there's a lot of tweaking that can be done, and it hasn't failed in 8 years.
Right.
So none of the best practices were put into place, and it still works.
Okay, so it's a reliable technology then. Okay,
Yep.
So when or if it does fail, how does it fail, and how do you prepare against it?
That's the question I had. That is the question. Now I'm starting, after our discussion, I'm starting to look down the chain and see where would a point of failure be? What, as Andrew described, what would be something that we just needed to live? There's certain things you can live with being broken, and there's certain things you can't. The things that you can't, where would that appear on that chain? And that's what I'm thinking through. And I think that's something we always should think through as we're building out a system. Like you mentioned, you wouldn't be able to work with that cluster, but do you have other clusters you can use? Do you have other side fills that you may have to run off of that for the time being? I think that's more the question than we're questioning Dante itself.
Right. And the thing about it from my perspective is, I try to look for all the failure points that could happen, right? Because there's some other ones that are in there that you may not think of. Like, are your switches on two separate breakers? Right? Because if both of your switches for your primary and your secondary network are on the same power source, and that breaker goes, you are done. Okay.
We had an environment one time where they wanted dual internet, but they came in through the same access way into the building, and a backhoe took them both out at the same time, even though it was from two different ISPs.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Don't let a backhoe in your backyard.
Yeah, beware the backhoe.
Beware the backhoe.
Thank you for this. This is, first of all, checklists are important. And checklists, believe it or not, allow redundancy in your operation. And we talk a lot about technical redundancy, but checklists allow an operational redundancy so that, heaven forbid, you get sick or you have to be away on vacation. Okay. It's wonderful if you go away for vacation, heaven forbid you get sick, that you're not so reliant that the show can't go on without you. I think that's the key takeaway for today. So thank you guys for joining, and we encourage anybody who's watching, no matter when you're watching, whether it's live or later, that you reach out to us. One of these days I'll get the email address going, but you could always put something in the chat, and I need redundant email systems. One of these days we'll get something in the chat, and that you'll be able to reach out to us, ask us any questions. We're more than happy to answer them. Anything you guys want to say before we go?
This stuff, you need to think about it. That's basically, if you boil everything down that's been said here, you can't wing it. You have to be methodical about how you think about how things are going to work and what might happen to make them not work.
Hatch and pray is not the way to go.
Yeah, have a plan.
Have
before
a
you get in
plan.
trouble, plan for it.
Mhm.
That's right. Listen, thank you guys for joining us today. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We should have some things in between that. It's just been really, really crazy. We should have some different videos up in between that. I'll work it out with the guys. But be sure to tune in next time for the Church AV Pro Forum. We're trying to build a community of people so we can work together to solve everybody's problem. Hasta la vista. See, normally you're supposed to get the buttons ready before you do that, but bye. I can see the Matrix was going by. There was so much stuff scrolling up on the screen.